Hello, everyone. We are excited to bring on our first guest in this kind of informal series, but really important information that our businesses need to know about when it comes to economic development, the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in the Flint Hills area. And we're excited to have Mr. Daryn Soldan here. He's the Director of Economic Development at the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce. Daryn, also prior to coming to the Manhattan Chamber, he was the president at the Wamego Chamber of Commerce. And prior to that, he was the director of the SBDC locally here in Manhattan. And that's how I know Daryn way back, setting up my first business entity. It's been about 8 years now.
That goes back far enough. We don't.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we've got a couple of questions here for Daryn, and we're just going to jump right in. The first question is, for those who may not know, what is your role as economic development director for the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce? What does your job kind of entail?
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. First off, appreciate you having me on. Very important topic we're talking about today. So, and something that I'm obviously just very passionate about personally, but obviously very passionate from a professional standpoint, and have worked around entrepreneurship and innovation in a number of different roles with chambers and economic development organizations. So yeah, in my current role, Director of Economic Development, so the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce has an economic development division, which I'm fortunate to get to head up. And really, we've got three main priorities. And those are, we want to create jobs in the area, we want to attract and retain talent in the area, and we want to foster and grow entrepreneurship and innovation in the area. So ultimately, economic development's about you want more people, more job, and those people need good jobs, need to be able to make good wages, and that ultimately benefits the entire area. And so it drives economic activity, and it drives sales and property tax revenue collection, so that our cities and counties and state can build out and support the communities with all the good stuff that we like to enjoy from a quality of life standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, and so a big part of that, any community that has a strong economic development effort, growing your own is always going to be absolutely vital, and maybe that doesn't always get all of the news headlines. You see big announcements that get made, you see XYZ company coming to town, that sort of thing, but the reality of economic development is retaining and expanding your existing businesses, and then growing new businesses in the community is always going to be the foundation. It's always going to be the largest driver of job growth. And so, that's a key part of our strategy. Manhattan Chamber's economic development efforts are supported both with public dollars from the city of Manhattan and Riley County, and also with significant private investment from the area business community. And so that ends up splitting about 50-50 on an annual basis. But so it's broad support across public and private. Ultimately, everyone benefits from more jobs, more people, and better opportunity.
That's wonderful, Daryn, and thank you for that. So I think we hear titles of different leadership roles, and we really want to help educate our entrepreneurs who are busy in their businesses to kind of know who's who when it comes to making decisions in our community. And you're definitely one of those folks, and you've also been an amazing supporter for our organization, Black Entrepreneurs of the Flint Hills. The Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce has been a great support to the organization, and we're also members of the chamber as well. And so definitely want to share that there's lots of collaboration happening. And so another question that we have comes to funding. And we know that part of our goal as an organization is to help Black entrepreneurs in our area to be able to access capital. But there's a process that goes along with accessing capital. And there are lots of resources out there that it could sometimes be almost overwhelming to know what's happening. And then there's programming that's, coming and things that are happening as the entrepreneurial ecosystem here continues to advance. And so one of our questions is, what are the available options for businesses when it comes to gap financing? And maybe for those who don't even know what gap financing actually is, from my understanding, and Daryn definitely helped me with this, but from my understanding, it's like if you get a loan at a bank and say you need 50,000, but you're approved for maybe 25,000. Now you have a gap of 25,000 that you need to fill. What are the options for people that may not get that initial financing that they need, but there are some resources in the community available to potentially help them with gap financing?
Yeah, and Sheila, that definition was good, right? And that happens all the time when it comes to financing, right? Especially through traditional sources, and that's just the nature of lending. But oftentimes you go to a bank, you might be able to lend some money against tangible assets, those sort of things. We see it happen all the time in business transition. Someone goes to buy a business, for example, a retail store or a restaurant. There are tangible things there that can be collateralized. That a bank will loan against, and then there's also what's often called blue sky or other operating expenses that are necessary. So there's value in that business above and beyond those tangible assets, and oftentimes that creates a situation where there's a need for gap financing. With very early stage or startup businesses, a lot of times that revolves around things like operating, helping pay for some operating expenses maybe before revenue generation is to the point where where it's fully supporting those expenses, and maybe some upfront costs related to marketing or to build out on some lease space or something like that. So very common that you end up with a situation, even if a business can get a loan, where they need a little bit more above and beyond that. And so that's where gap financing programs become so vital, because instead of someone putting it on a credit card or taking completely draining personal savings or otherwise, there may be some options to get some low interest money. Again, it's still loan money, but to get some low interest money into those deals. And so one of the key partners in Kansas on that, and really important across a number of communities, including in the Manhattan, Junction City, Potawatomi County, Wamego area, is a group called Network Kansas. And Network Kansas is a State Department of Commerce supported entity. They're not a government entity; they're a separate, not-for-profit entity, but they are a number of avenues for funding that have been created both at the state and through some federal pass-through funds for them to run different gap financing programs. And probably the most or the longest established one of those is what's called their e-community program. And that's something where it can be loans up to $45,000. Typically, those have to make up no more than about half of a project. But let's say, back to example, let's say someone was able to borrow $30,000 from the bank. They're putting some of their own money into a deal. They could go make an application, assuming they qualify through some other things, which we'll talk about. They could make an application through this e-community program in Potawatomi County, in Riley County, in Geary County. And all three of the communities have this program through Network Kansas, and borrow, at a low interest rate, and reasonable terms, probably something in the 3-4% for 5 years or less. Could borrow an additional $30,000 if approved, and that could be used for things like overhead, operating expenses, inventory purchases, blue sky in a business purchase or a business acquisition situation. So those kind of things can be really valuable. The Manhattan Chamber administers that e-community program in Riley County. Potawatomi County Economic Development does in Potawatomi County, and Junction City Area Chamber of Commerce, Geary County Economic Development does in Geary County. So I just encourage folks, if you're interested in any of these Network Kansas programs talk about, reach out to your local economic development organization, depending which county you're in. And if you're beyond that 3-county region, again, but there's 69, 70 of these in Kansas. So there's a lot of counties. Over 2/3 of the counties in Kansas participate, and it's growing every year. So there is a resource out there. Some key things about e-community, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Grow KS programs, but some key things about e-community to remember are that it's gap financing, and it has to be matching dollars against, so there needs to be a traditional lending source involved. So right now, The qualifying lending sources here would be banks. And so there'd be a bank, these get applied to deals that have a bank loan involved, basically. So that's one qualifier. There's also some qualifications geographically. So in cities that have more than 50,000 people in Kansas, these e-community programs can only be applied to what's termed urban distressed areas. And so those are census tracts that fall below a certain average household income. And so in Manhattan, that area is typically kind of along Fort Riley Boulevard, the downtown area, up the like the east side of the park, Aggieville, and up the east side of campus. So kind of keep that in mind, basically east of campus, around the Aggieville and downtown area, and then along the kind of the south part of town. So areas that wouldn't qualify, I think of commercial areas if you're going to open a retail business or a restaurant or some kind of service commercial business and an office, geographically probably not going to qualify. Sutchell Commons, Candlewood, some of those areas on the west side of town or west of campus. And then everything outside the city limits of Manhattan and Riley County qualifies. And then within Geary County and Potawatomi County, the entirety of the county qualifies for these programs because those are all considered rural areas, even within the city limits. So, be honest, that gets a little convoluted, right? And so, really would encourage folks that are interested in these programs. Again, reach out to your economic development folks. Talk through, before going and spending a bunch of time on an application. Talk through to make sure qualifying use as far as the type of business, because there's some things in there about rental. Rental units, whether residential or office, owner occupied, and other uses. Talk through the geographic component of it, and then make sure that the financial institution working with are well versed in the programs. And we've done quite a bit of outreach here over the last year or so to area financial institutions, and we'll be hopefully with some new programs coming on later in 2023, be doing some more of that. Make sure that they're kind of in the loop. This is something you're interested in, and that can also be important because a lot of times a deal, if you can bring in some additional, assuming that the borrower is in a position where they can carry that additional debt, if you can bring in some of this gap financing at a low interest rate, that can help facilitate the bank end of things as well and make the deal look better in their eyes.
Yeah, that's really good. Daryn, is there a capital requirement? So like, for example, one of the things is our businesses, a lot of times this may be their first loan. So there's a process. They may not have the credit score or the collateral. That's just a reality that, exists. And so what is the minimum kind of capital requirement in order to get the gap financing done?
Sure. And again, it's one of the things, and this can be a challenge sometime. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are coming down the pike where hopefully we can better address it. But, one of the things here is there does have to be that bank loan component, right? So, and these e-community loans can be as low as $5,000. So $5,000 to $45,000. So again, kind of the math on that, those are matching back against a bank loan. Each e-community, because they can't go beyond 60% of the value of the overall of the deal. But typically in Riley County, that number, that every county has the ability to set their own threshold and some of that, as long as it stays below that cap. It's typically been 50-50. That's kind of been the deal. So again, think if a company needs $10,000, and if they're able to get $5,000 commitment from a bank, and they can apply for the Network Kansas e-community dollars, get that approved locally, get another $5,000 at low interest rate through that program. That's kind of where the baseline is that $5,000 amount, but obviously can grow up from there. One of the challenges, I think, to your question is that, right, this still requires traditional bank lending. And none of these programs are meant to take the place of a bank or otherwise. In fact, if anything, we see communities out there trying to get more revolving loan funds and things like that in place so that they can help make more businesses bankable, right? So one of the things that's kind of coming down the pike that we're working on is trying to establish a locally controlled revolving loan fund for businesses. and in the area. And in that case, it would create another matching program for these Network Kansas e-community programs, as well as the Grow KS programs I'll talk about in a second. But two, it would allow the ability actually for potentially a company to go in, get a low interest, shorter term, 3-year, 4-year, 36, 48-month loan, and without a requirement for matching dollars from a bank, and be able to pay that back. Helps with the credit worthiness component you were talking about, helps with the financial and credit history piece, and proves some track record, and turns around and go to a bank. And that's something, as we've talked to other communities that have programs, Topeka included, that they've really been feel is a big value of having a locally controlled revolving loan, is that it helps more businesses, especially early stage and startup businesses, become bankable, because they can go show that ability to borrow, pay back, and then their next round of financing they're going to a bank and getting a traditional bank loan, and then leveraging that to get an even larger amount of gap financing into their business, and helping push things forward. So yeah, the big challenge there, like I said, still there's the traditional lending component to it. That's the way these programs were built and work, but we're also working to find some other alternatives there, where especially for some of those very small early stage needs, that we get some capital in folks' hands, and let them grow the business, prove their ability to pay that back, and then run with it from there.
Yeah, that's really great. I know later last year we had our first event together, the Black and Bankable event, and that's, we talked about all of these things of what does it take to be bankable, and then we brought banking partners to the table, and the Manhattan Area Chamber of Commerce was our main sponsor for that event. And so we definitely learned a lot through that process, and being able to talk with our local banks about what those challenges are, and then understand what their process is, so that we could, have an understanding. And so I think that a lot of times we talk about access to capital being one of the number one needs of our businesses. And we have to also pair and couple that with, as we were talking about earlier, technical assistance, coaching, programming, as far as training for businesses, culturally competent training for businesses. And so that's definitely, on the realm of the work that we're doing together as a community to help more people be bankable, to help our, entrepreneurial ecosystem, and economic create more economic development here in our region. And so I think that you mentioned Network Kansas and the Grow KS program. Could you talk a little bit more about that program?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a number of Network Kansas. We talked about e-community quite a bit. That's been around for a while. In Riley County, about 2016, I think was when the program was established there. That's when Network Kansas had traditionally been a rural program, and brought it into communities like Wichita, Lawrence, Topeka, Manhattan, and some of the surrounding Kansas City area, to get into some of these communities that are 50,000 and above. They have a new program here as of late 2022 called Grow KS. You can look it up online. GrowKS.com has some more information. You can click through and see flyers on there. There's a number of different programs. The one that's probably most relevant to local businesses here would be what's called their minority, women-led, and economically disadvantaged starter loans. And so, as a title, those are geared specifically towards minority, women-owned, or owners that fit into were defined as economically disadvantaged categories. And so those loans are, again, there's local control, so that's actually built out over the structure of the e-communities. And so there's a local review board that can review those applications. In this case, the financial details, again, a bank loan or another local or public source of funding, which we don't have set up yet, but we're working on. In this case, with that particular Grow KS program, and this is the minority, women-led, and economically disadvantaged starter loans, can do up to a 200% match on a bank loan. So a business that got a $50,000 bank loan could get $100,000 through Grow KS of low interest. In their case, it's 4% interest for loans with 1 to 5 year terms, and 6% interest for loans with 6 to 10 year terms. And that's a program that we're seeing starting to get leveraged pretty significantly. We've got a couple in the pipeline right now that are being reviewed, and then if there are capital needs above and beyond that, that up to $100,000, 200% match. There are some other growth related loans that Network Kansas has through the GrowCast program that are then reviewed at the state level. So they're not reviewed by the local review committee, but they're structured the same way, just larger amounts reviewed at the state level. So uses are very similar again to, and I've referenced this, make sure I tell you right, but very similar again to some of the community startup costs, working capital, franchise fees, acquisition of equipment, inventory, and other costs. Basically, you can't be paying yourself as an owner. You can't be making speculative investments in real estate with these, or developing speculative real estate with these, and you can't obviously be doing anything illegal. But outside of that, one of the reasons why these Network Kansas programs have been so well adopted around the state is that they do provide that they hit that gap financing target with regards to a lot of things that are non-tangible assets and or operating expenses that early stage businesses tend to feel the brunt on, just because you're not, in many cases you're trying to stretch capital and doing that while ramping up revenue generating activities. And so that's where there can really be a sweet spot for these types of programs.
Yeah, that's good. I pulled up the website here and I will share it in our on the links here with this video, but y'all can see growkansas.com. It's through Network Kansas. And is this the site, Daryn, that
Yep,
you were?
that's the one. Yeah, if you just click on the loan program details, it takes you to a listing of the 5 different programs, and then within those, I would just note that minority women economically disadvantaged starter program, and is really the one that is the one that we as the local administrators of these Network Kansas programs will deal the most with. That doesn't mean that there aren't coming. We've got one right now it's actually in Manhattan that is in the process of applying for that minority women economically disadvantaged growth program. And so that has a little bit larger cap on it as far as the match goes. The ceiling on that's a little bit higher dollar amount, but that gets reviewed at the state level, not at the local level. So, and I'm happy. I think one thing on all of this is that, there's information online. Network Kansas folks are great. If people need more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, whether you're in Riley, Pottawatomie, or Geary County, reach out to your economic development organization. Sheila can share my contact information, just Daryn, DARYN @manhattan.org. Shoot me a note. I'm happy always to, set up a meeting, chat about this on the phone. Or oftentimes what happens is this is something a business owner, an entrepreneur brings up with their banker, or prospective banker in a process that they're engaged in. And then the bank may request some additional information and want to know okay, tell us some more about this program. They're obviously, their gears are turning. They're figuring out how to potentially structure a deal. We're happy to come in and provide some additional information and even talk about examples of deals that have gotten done in the area with these programs, and that a lot of times will help A, technical knowledge wise, but B, kind of understand the benefits of doing the programs and get people comfortable with the idea that, oh yeah, this is something that's, it's definitely not new. You just have to look in Pottawatomie County. Pottawatomie County Economic Development has been a leader in the state for a number of years when it comes to volume of e-community loans, and they've supported a very broad group of businesses with these loans, and we're getting more and more active in Riley County, and Geary County is as well. So a lot of great examples in the area. Always happy to help with educating, whether it's business owners, entrepreneurs, or banks about these programs.
Yeah, that's great. That's great information. And, I think that, we definitely this is a big topic, and we're going to be able to, bring more folks on and discuss further, like the SBDC, the Small Business Development Centers, and bringing on those folks and SBA, and there's different partners. And so this is just a great way to get the information out, have it all in one place where, someone could listen to it at any time. And then, of course, make sure that you reach out, because we've got folks here in the community that's doing this work. And of course, our organization is here to help and help and advocate for your businesses as well. And so we just wanted to take the time. And Daryn, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share some of
Absolutely.
the great information. But I wanted to see if there's anything else that you wanted to share before we conclude here.
Yeah, there are some really good things coming down the pipe for your business because if it was easy, it would all be done already. But and I appreciate Sheila what you're doing and some other members of Black Entrepreneurs of Flint Hills are doing as far as partnering and being part of this process. But we're working with a number of community partners, and it really, I mean, it's a team game here. Right? It just that's the nature of this type of work. But to work on basically establishing a fund and capitalizing a fund that could support a local revolving loan fund program, and potentially some small business incentives, small business grants, for very early stage businesses. And so there's a number of different fronts that are being pursued there. One is some public funding, which there'll be, we're shooting for an ask coming up here in March. There's been K-State Innovation Partners has been involved in those conversations, committed to some funding to help support those types of programs, and specifically around, commercialization, net importer type of businesses, high growth potential types of businesses. I think we're going to be pursuing, and we've had some good conversations kind of on the philanthropic and private side of the community, with organizations, foundation funds, folks that have an interest in companies that have an interest in investing in helping establish these kinds of programs. And so I think keep an eye out here over the next 3 to 5 months. I think by mid-year, I hope to have some of those things in place and create another opportunity, as I alluded to a couple of times, for folks to be able to go get early stage capital into businesses and maybe be able to do it without requiring a bank loan. Again, not something that's supposed to be taking the place of a bank loan, but something that may come even before a bank loan. And so just taking those building blocks and establishing credit, establishing that ability to put the information you put together to apply for an early stage revolving loan for $5,000 or $10,000 is the exact same information that 18 months after that, I'm going to be taken in to apply for a bank loan and then get some gap financing to stack on top of that. And so the technical assistance part you alluded to as well, we're trying to build out, and I know your Black Entrepreneurs of Flint Hills is doing a lot of work in that space for your members and have brought people into the community already, like you mentioned with the Black and Bankable event, or pursuing other opportunities. We're working on that as well, and building out and structuring technical assistance, whether it be through the SBDC or other resources, Spark and others that can come in and basically be that system and that support around entrepreneurs in our community, to assure them that even if pursuing a certain path or certain financing right now isn't the right time, or everything isn't put together, it needs to be that there's assistance and there's help to move things forward. So no right now isn't no forever. I know it's kind of the way that I think you've said that before, and that's a good way to, in my mind, to put it. So yeah, we're excited about where things are going. Appreciate the partnerships and the willingness to kind of get down in the weeds and help do some of this work. And I think that it's exciting because this community, I think, we're right on the cusp of doing some good things from an entrepreneurship standpoint, establishing some of these programs, and people are invested in making it happen. So I think stay tuned, to your members, stay tuned. And obviously, if anyone wants to kind of help take up that cause and share their story or talk about the value of what these potential programs would be to them, the more voices we can bring together as we're sharing this message and making asks to elected officials and talking to different potential funding sources in the community, the better. So always open to have those conversations as well.
Yes, for sure. Thank you for adding that, Daryn, because it's so important. The collaboration is so important. And I think that there's a lot of great entrepreneurs and business owners and business ideas that are out there in our community. Our community is so transient, and we've got K-State and Fort Riley, and, being able to have the resources available to support those individuals as they are considering their more permanent plans, and staying here past graduation from K-State, past active duty in the military, and really considering this Flint Hills region as a viable option to stay. These types of support resources and programs are needed, as we all know, to retain those good folks here. And so thank you for the work that you're doing. And definitely, as you mentioned, with our city officials, we recently got into some work with the city of Manhattan and the National League of Cities. Manhattan is actually the only city in the state of Kansas involved in this particular work when it comes to Black founders and access to capital. The city of Manhattan is engaging with us on that, and we're gathering data and research that's going to go towards a study with the NLC and Kauffman Foundation, along with Collab Capital. And we're really excited to be engaged in this work. And there's been a lot of meetings that have been had, a lot of conversations over the past couple of years. And really the purpose of bringing our good folks on here is to really kind of just discuss and share this information in one place as these things are really developing. As you said, we're on the cusp of so many great things. So thank you again, Daryn, for joining us and sharing and taking your time today on this Friday morning. And yeah, stay tuned for more updates. And again, thanks for your time and your support.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sheila. And just encourage folks to reach out if you'd like more information or kind of be part of the conversation on some of those plans we talked about going forward. So appreciate everything you're doing and thanks for getting the word out.